Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Hugging the Cactus, a Mel Gibson podcast. And today we cover Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. Weren't we all excited when Mad Max 3 was coming? Except it wasn't Mad Max 3. It was something called Beyond Thunderdome, and it was going to come out in the summer of 1985. I was there. I was there at the theater in that summer, that fateful summer of 1985, when Rambo First Blood Part 2 was out, when Back to the Future was out, when Fletch was out. It was out and nobody showed up. Well, not in my theater anyway. I sat there in the theater by myself. It was my first by myself experience. Not that I hadn't been to the movies by myself before, but that there was actually nobody else in the room. That was a very strange experience. Kind of like podcasting by yourself. That's also a very strange experience. I do it nonetheless. Perhaps because of that seminal experience of sitting there by myself and having the whole movie theater to myself. Well, did anyone expect that? I don't think so. They spent 12 million making the movie. It didn't bring in the 100 million that the previous movie, The Road Warrior, or as we like to call it, Mad Max 2, brought in. No, it only brought in a domestic, and domestic means American box office of 36 million. Worldwide, they never declared it for some reason. But as I said, it kind of fell short of its mark. And if my experience at that movie theater was anything to go by, not a lot of people saw it in the movies. They saw it on video. They might have seen it somewhere else, but they certainly didn't see it in the theater. That's a shame, because it's a decent movie. What happened to Beyond Thunderdome? How could a movie that potentially could have earned so much money, how could it have derailed so bad? Well, that's what we are here to talk about today. It's easy to point fingers, and a big finger would be the death of co-director, co-creator Byron Kennedy, who went down in a helicopter crash. His engine cut out over some lake he was flying over. I read somewhere it was Lake Gorang. Never been there myself, although I've been to New South Wales. But his engine cut out, and that was it. That was the end of Byron. He did make it out of the helicopter, but he died a day later at the hospital. Obviously, George Miller wasn't really in a position to make a Mad Max 3 movie. Not when the guy you made it with isn't there anymore. So, it's logical that you start looking for other projects. But in the end, he came back to what would be Mad Max 3. They did actually make trailers with the Mad Max 3 logo. But by the time it got to the movies, it was Beyond Thunderdome. Perhaps that had something to do with the song. Tina Turner had a huge hit with We Don't Need Another Hero. We all love that song, of course. And Beyond Thunderdome is in the song. So I don't know. Perhaps they thought they could market it that way. It was typical of the era where music videos would be used to market a movie instead of the usual way, the way it'd been done before. And that worked to an extent, I suppose, because Tina Turner was a big name and she was a big part of the movie. And she was one of the better parts of the movie, as far as I'm concerned. And the songs were great. The entire soundtrack, in fact, was fantastic. It was not done by the previous guy, which was Brian May. That's not the guy from Queen. That's just some Aussie. It was this one was done by Maurice Jarre, who was a huge name. Apparently, producer of the movie, the distributor, Warner Brothers, insisted that they, you know, get a bigger name. So they got Maurice Jarre, who of course is famous for Dr. Zhivago, he did The Passage to India, and coincidentally, he did Lawrence of Arabia. And Lawrence of Arabia, of course, is a big inspiration to George Miller for his Mad Max saga that all play out in the desert, as does aforementioned Lawrence. Cinematography was done by the same guy. Fortunately, they didn't fire everybody, so Dean Semler came back. Dean Semler was the guy behind The Road Warrior. The screenplay was done by Terry Hayes again in cooperation with George Miller. Um, so basically, George Miller gets production, writing, and directing credit. So the big finger to why this movie wasn't what we expected was, well, the death of, or the lack of influence of Byron Kennedy, perhaps. I think a bigger influence is the fact that this is an American movie, not an Australian one. As I said, it's uh, paid for and distributed by Warner Brothers. And so they, well, you know, they called the shots. And it didn't just end, of course, with changing uh, whoever is involved with the soundtrack. Um, it goes right along with, you know, changing a lot of other things. Amongst them, the movie is no longer uh, as nihilistic as the other two are. It's basically they changed the tone and the theme, and they made it more palatable for an American audience, which means it has a happy ending and it has kids in it, and there's no real violence, and all the things that made Mad Max 1 and 2 so awesome and fun was gone, pretty much. Instead of violence, we get slapstick. Um, Instead of blood, we get funny haha. And instead of brutal car chases, there's a runaway train chased by, uh, I don't know, circus carts, whatever they are. Theme park rides. They look like theme park rides, which is another conundrum in this situation. Warner Brothers, of course, distributed this, produced this, but there were no toys, even though it was geared towards children. Mad Max was supposed to be what the Goonies. So there was no Mad Max toy. There were no Mad Max cars. Missed opportunity, to put it mildly. And obviously, toys are a big part of marketing, especially in the 80s. Uh, this was 1985. It was the height of the toy market. Those toys are still sought after today. People pay a lot of money for stuff from Star Wars and what was it back then? Masters of the Universe and G.I. Joe and Transformers, and they were all over TV and they were selling, you know, record amounts. But no Max Muscle Car, no action figures. So is it any wonder that this movie died a horrible death? They didn't bother to market the movie outside of the US, or they barely marketed it, figuring, well, it was a success before, so, you know, if we just put a poster up, they'll show up. Well, I know how that went. It got killed by its competitors. I remember going to James Bond: A View to a Kill like the week before. Kind of tragic what happened here. It seems like Miller didn't actually want to make this movie, didn't want to produce it. That's why he made something else, settled on telling a different story, or maybe something in the Mad Max universe, but not with Mad Max. Part of that was because Mel wasn't really that stoked to do another one. He played the character twice and he played it the same. And so, you know, I'm sure whatever George Miller showed up with, Mel just said, no, no, thank you. I'm sure he was polite. But then there was this story he found, or really, Miller was at some point approached by a writer. His name was Russell Hoban. He'd written a book called Ridley Walker. Ultimately, Miller declined, but somehow a lot of the ideas from that book did show up in Beyond Thunderdome. Hoban didn't sue him for the somewhat striking similarities. even though I think a case could be made for plagiarism. But I don't know. Maybe he thought, well, the movie's tanked anyway. Why bother suing? Kind of a classy movie, if you ask me. Or maybe this was just some Hollywood backhanded deal where they took care of him in some way. Or maybe he was offered some other projects, or who knows what they did. Irony of it all is that this movie was praised by the critics, whereas the first two were panned by the critics because of its violence and its nihilism and its etc. Because there was no violence in it, and because it told a bigger story, people loved it. At least the critics did. Roger Ebert made a point of saying it was the best of the three. Uh, yeah, so much for critics, right? Now, Miller, of course, is used to kind of co-directing Mad Max, so he asked another director he had worked with on the dismissal called Ogilvy to help him out. And of course, he did. They shared direction duties. That's caused some controversy ever since because people claim it is an that's why the tone of the movie is so different, that it's an Ogilvy movie and that Miller barely did anything because he was bereaved. Miller, of course, disputes this. Miller was in fact offered First Blood at some point and passed on it. Well, really all directors passed on it until Kachev finally got it. But that would have been interesting, right? It would have meant that Mel Gibson would have played Rambo in another alternate universe. Anyway, for this one, Mel turned down every story concept pitched to him, really until George came up with the current story. So it's the story we got is as much to blame on Mel as anyone else, really, because the long and the short of it is that the story doesn't really work. It's in fact kind of boring, and that's a shame because the first one and definitely the second one are far from boring. But Mad Max 3 starts off okay, and then the kids show up and the whole thing just starts to drag. But we'll get to that. Anyway, in the novelization, which I read, you get a Mad Max that is a lot less nihilistic and a lot less depressed. He has a lot more dialogue and he's a lot more inclined to help people. Um, that's not typical for Mad Max. So there's a diversion right there. There's some deleted scenes we could probably talk about. The big one is a scene where Max dreams about his family. He realizes he isn't so different from the gangs that killed his family anymore. But they deleted that. It wasn't actually used. The whole thing just felt a lot less Australian to me. There were no assless chaps to begin with. But fortunately, there were a lot of Australian actors. So we get the usual group of Shakespearean actors, and you can't really find fault with any of them. It's at least well acted. It's fun. The Gyro Captain is not back. There's a new character called Jedediah, and those are not the same characters as the first two. In fact, George Miller isn't really that concerned with continuity. He's from the Sylvester Stallone School of Filmmaking, where you don't really care about what you did with the first or the second movie or the third movie. You just make a completely new movie and just make up your character and play it differently as you come along. Same with the Gyro Captain and the new character Jedediah. He has a son now, but he still flies. Basically, they didn't want Bruce Spence for it, but they had written a character like the Gyro Captain, but not the Gyro Captain as a character. And finally, they couldn't find anyone, offered it to Bruce Spence, and well, that's why we're all confused. Is it the same guy? Isn't it the same guy? When is this story happening? Is it before? Is it after? No, not at all. None of that. According to the book, this story is set 15 years after the events we witnessed in The Road Warrior. So, well, there you have it. Believe it or not, Billy Idol auditioned for this movie, but he wasn't cast. You'd think he was a shoe-in, that they would at least, have him as a cameo or something, but no. Who knows what happened there? They were lucky to get Tina Turner, not just for the soundtrack, but because she was, well, spectacular in Mad Max. Like I said, the cast is great, and As it turned out, Tina Turner was born to play this part. Who knew? She wasn't born to drive stick, however. So when she showed up at the lot, they had to get her a new car because she couldn't drive it. And so they got her an automatic, apparently. The 52 kids in the tribe um, were cast out of 1,800 kids who applied. Uh, I can imagine what being a casting director for that is like. I don't even want to think about it. There's a musician in there, an heavy metal artist called Angry Anderson. I had to look up his stuff. Um, Not my thing, even though I like heavy metal. But he apparently loved Mad Max and he wanted to be in a movie. And when you want to be in a movie too badly, well, you don't read the script too well. So he gets comic relief. That's basically it. Uh, he's Auntie Entity's main goon, her enforcer, the little guy who gives the finger. Anyway, some of the deleted scenes were actually added into the videos that Tina Turner did for both songs. George Miller actually directed those videos. That's why they're in there, because he owned the footage. Another interesting tidbit about this movie is that the character Screw Loose is actually the template for the War Boys in the sequel decades later called Fury Road. We've all seen that, of course. According to Miller, Tom Hardy's Mad Max in Fury Road is not the feral kid. We all want him to be the feral kid. It would make sense that he would be the feral kid. But hey, it's Miller's thing. He gets to decide, right? Well, let's get to the movie. Dying time is here. Okay, so you get an opening shot from the air, and it shows the wasteland, and it zooms in on a truck, and that truck is pulled by camels. So they kind of suggest that he ran out of gas. We see the gyro captain, or I should say Jedediah, with a child, and they jump onto the truck and hijack it. And the driver of the camels, I should say, is left in the desert chasing his vehicle. And there's a monkey in the back of the truck, and he's throwing out stuff at the driver. And so he'll survive. And the driver is ultimately revealed to be Max. Okay, so in the next shot, you see Max with his long hair flowing, and he's walking towards a city. That city turns out to be a place called Bartertown. Um, some water seller comes up to him offering him water, and he just takes his Geiger counter out, and basically that's not palatable. But that doesn't seem to bother anyone in Bartertown, I guess. So he's basically in town to find out who has his truck, right? Because that's probably the reason why he even came to Bartertown. He has to hand over his weapons, which is a comic scene where he has so many weapons on him that it just this huge pile. You really have to wonder how he carried all that stuff in, or why he wasn't stripped shirts to begin with. But then, so he gets into discussion because obviously a guy with so many guns on him has skills. And they say, well, we're looking for a guy like that. So he gets taken up to the penthouse, which is kind of a bird's nest made from metal. The head of the mayor of the town, or the head of the gang, which however you want to see it, is up there. And of course, they test him, and Max wins after a short fight. And they tell him, well, congratulations, you're the first to survive the audition. And he gets fresh water. He doesn't bring out his Geiger counter this time, and assuming it's clean. Auntie Entity, played by Tina Turner, explains that she wants a guy killed. And in exchange for killing him, she will re-equip him. And he's like, well, why do you want me to do this? And they're explaining, well, there are subtleties, which is basically saying, well, it's we can't just kill him because that would reflect very badly on us. And so Auntie shows him through a periscope which is kind of funny when you think about it, because the periscope looks down, not up. The periscope is kind of a bird's eye view, and you see a large pig pen, and apparently they produce electricity with the um, shit stench of the pigs, which is ironic because the production was almost shut down because of the smell. People complained, and they had to put in filters. So in reality, um, they filtered out most of the smell, but they have to play it like, well, they have like this huge uh, shit basin of pig shit, and they use the nitrate and the chemicals natural chemicals produced by the pigs to create electricity. And there's a little guy who knows how to do this called Master, and he sits on top of this big dude, and he's called Blaster, and together they are Master Blaster. So basically, they're saying, okay, so this Master Blaster guy, um, we want to keep the brain, but we want to dump the body. So basically, what they do is they want to take Master Blaster's power away from him, so they can control him. Because guess what? He can order an embargo anytime he wants. He can just shut off the power. And so there you have it. That's the reason why they're in this kind of power balance. And of course, and Auntie's best way of dealing with that is just having him killed by an outsider. There's a discussion about the car. Master Blaster wants his car, and Max goes, "Well, no, you can't have it. It's my car." And but they're saying, "Yeah, well, it's ours now. And by the way, it's armed, so disarm it." Okay, so ultimately Max goes to disarm it, and he tests his whistle, and the blaster guy, goes nuts. He has this big helmet on, and apparently, if you have a high pitched whistle, that really bothers your ears inside that helmet. So we store that away for information. This is foreshadowing, a little on the nose, but then again. So Max goes back to Auntie. He agrees to the deal. He has to face Master Blaster in the Thunderdome. And the Thunderdome is kind of like a Roman arena, kind of like this cage, kind of a Mad Max version of in the UFC cage. That's probably where they got it from. And so two men enter, one man leaves. And so Max picks a fight with Master Blaster. The fight's on. So the master of ceremonies of this great gladiatorial spectacle introduces the two combatants. Max is introduced as the man with no name, and so he gets attached to the rigging. And in the rigging, there's hammers and chainsaws and all kinds of weapons. And they explain to him, I know we all know you won't break the rules because there aren't any, which is great. And Tina Turner dramatically says, well, this is Thunderdome, death is listening, and it will take the first man that screams. Apparently, this is the height of entertainment for this town. And the match starts, and Max is immediately manhandled. The guy is way too big. Blaster is very experienced in this cage thing. He's fought in it before. And of course, the whistle, the secret weapon, becomes the big thing. And of course, he loses it to create some tension. So Master goes for a spear, and he barely misses skewering Max. And instead, they skewer an onlooker, but you don't see any blood because, this is PG. This is haha, he speared someone. And then Max finds and starts the chainsaw, but of course it runs out of gas immediately because everything has run out of gas apparently. And so Max slashes the rigging where he's in, and he starts avoiding the charges, Blaster charging at him. And he finds a hammer, but Blaster cuts his rigging. And so Max finally uses the whistle, and he gets his hammer and he starts pounding on him. Finally, he knocks his helmet off. And then the reveal, Blaster is dim-witted. Blaster is basically a big body with a child's mind. So Max doesn't want to kill him because it's sad. That's not the deal. He has to kill Blaster. So Auntie's pissed, and she's saying, "Hey, this wasn't the deal." We're basically revealing to everyone, well, we were, we had this guy in here to kill him. And so Auntie's men kill Blaster anyway. And Max is like, okay, now I'm gonna leave. But apparently there are some rules to this whole uh, Thunderdome thing, because two men enter, one man leaves. Yeah, well, the one guy is dead, but of course he didn't kill him. And bust the deal, face the wheel, I guess. That's what they're all chanting, because in a town based on barter, it's not surprising that there's few rules, but the one rule you don't break is if you have a deal with somebody, if you have a contract, if you have a handshake, there are some brutal consequences. There is some form of legislation when you don't adhere to that rule. So bust the deal, face the wheel, and it's kind of this wheel of fortune thing, and they turn it, and so basically that decides if you have a death sentence or whatever. Now, finally, it turns out it stops at Gulag. And you think, Gulag, what are they going to do now? So now we are beyond Thunderdome. Yes, this is in the first 20 minutes. So this is one of the reasons this movie kind of, yeah, um, challenges you to stay with it, because the title of the film is Thunderdome. So you're figuring that's the big thing in the movie. But it isn't. It's just something to start the plot with. So, Max doesn't go to a gulag, he is exiled. And they do that by placing him on a horse with a big pumpkin head on, and they send him into the desert. And Master, who's still refusing to, fix the system, is lowered into the pigsty. One of Max's friends he made in that pigsty, I think his character is called Pig Killer, sends the monkey out with water. So help is coming. Meanwhile, we see that Max's horse has died and is sinking into quicksand. Quicksand was a big thing in the 80s. You don't see that much anymore, but back then it was like on every TV show. Anywho, has managed to free himself, and the monkey finds him, and he gets some water, and he starts wandering through the desert. And at some point, he just loses consciousness from, I assume, sheer exhaustion. And then you see a lone figure coming out of the morning sky, and um, that figure finds Max half covered in desert sand. So, then you see Max being dragged on a sled. The figure yells, and a small boy who's playing with a lizard yells back, and he yells at others, and then it just sort of turns into the Goonies or Lord of the Flies or any of those films. Basically, you see kids of all ages. They're living like I don't know, Peter Pan's little troop, and they're all decked out in like little Indians. They're walking around with this big stick with a vinyl record on it, and that's like a staff denoting rank or something. And so they try to wake him with the record. This is all their perspective, and they try to wake him with the record. One boy carries a radio, it doesn't work, and another one has a plays a Bugs Bunny toy, and they look like kind of survivors from something, and they're playing with old memorabilia from before the apocalypse, but they don't really know what it's for. Hence the uh, phonograph record on a stick. But the monkey has survived, and he's around. And so those kids start cutting Max's hair and taking care of him. And ultimately, he wakes up and he freaks out, of course, because he's, one minute you're in the desert and the next there's like, hundreds of kids around you. He comes into this like insane atmosphere, because as soon as you make a noise, what are kids going to do? They're going to mimic you. They're going to make the same noise. So everything he does, they throw it back at him. There's dozens of kids, and at some point he's trying to get them to listen, but they won't. Leadership arrives. Mask Max starts asking who they are. And the guy who says, well, we are the waiting ones. And he's like, well, waiting for who? Well, we're waiting for you. And he's like, well, who do you think I am? And the leader says, well, oh, this must be a test. And he's like, okay. Well, so Max starts playing along. This isn't the first group of lost children he's come across. Who knows? The leader is the oldest kid, starts explaining their story. And they fashioned branches into kind of like this television screen. And they start explaining about the poxy clips full of pain, the apocalypse. They went bye bye to the said bye bye to the high scrapers. They had their own language, just like the Z generation does. And so their plane was wrecked, and because they got stopped by the wind or something, or a gang called uh, Turbulence. And so at some point, the adults felt, well, we need to get help here. So they left, apparently all of them, and told them to wait. One of us will come. And now Max shows up. Who knows how long they've been waiting, but well, there he is. And so Max, by his standards, gently declines, and he throws their little captain hat into the air, and then something weird happens. The wind catches the hat, and the kids become excited, and they run out, and Max starts to follow them, and he finds them finally on a downed airplane, the wreckage of a plane, and all the kids start standing on top of it, chanting. And Max looks at them and realizes the futility of the situation and just walks away. So there's a little bit of the old Max left. He's not completely Disneyfied. So the girl who found him wants to walk back to civilization. But Max explained, no, there isn't. Doesn't exist anymore. The only thing close to civilization is Bartertown. But the girl still wants to leave, and she starts to encourage others to follow her because, the fact that Max shows up and that they're apparently not going to be rescued, that's a big moment in their tribe. So Max solves it by just punching her in the face and knocking her out. Next morning, it turns out that Screwloose, one of the kids in the tribe, the weird one, has let the older girl and some of the other kids who wanted to go, he let them go free. So Max goes after them with a rescue party. And so they find them and they hear them yelling in the distance. And apparently, they're also drowning in quicksand. They're holding on to each other because one kid is drowning in quicksand. And Max comes running up and starts to help pull. But one of the kids is lost. And it's not explained in the movie, but apparently that's the child of the girl who found Max. But that's in the book, not in the movie. So they camp in the desert and they run into Bartertown. And of course, the kids get excited. So they end up sneaking in, and you see Master has fallen from glory. He's no longer Master Blaster. He's just Master, and he's stuck in a cage in the middle of the pig pen. And at some point, Max started asking, well, where are the other kids? Because some of them have gone on exploring. And of course, they make a mess. And so they have to escape. And Auntie's goons start chasing them. This is the point where Pig Killer, Max's friend, seizes the moment and escapes with Master. Well, hilarity ensues because this is one big slapstick event. This is not real action. This is just, funny haha. So you have like the one convenient goon mistake after the other as they are chasing the kids. And they're chased all over. So Auntie starts rallying her troops, and because the Master is gone, and he's basically the guy who runs the energy. So everybody gets galvanized by Auntie because she's basically offering a reward. Chase now, pay later. So everybody starts revving their engines. So they're on this train that Master had. Start driving it, and so Max asks, "Okay, so what's the plan?" And he's like, "Plan? There's no plan." So the kids find a actual record player on the train, And of course, they have their little uh, stand with the record on it. So they take the record and they play it. And it turns out there's nothing of any significance on it. It's just French for beginners. So you get like this funny Disney scene where the kids are like mimicking the French words. Anyway, one of the kids finds binoculars and tries them out, and then he sees the horde that's chasing them. More slapstick ensues. So instead of an exciting car chase with some real stakes, all we get is basically people getting whacked with pots and pans and all kinds of stuff. Then you see like the guy played by Angry Anderson called Iron Bar. He's jumping from car to car and he's shooting harpoons into the train. Well, okay, so basically that's really what we get is a kind of set piece where they're kind of repeating what they did in Mad Max 2, which is kind of cool. You know, that's a fun thing. If it wasn't so slapsticky, I didn't you would enjoy it more, but it's okay for what it is. And then at some point they have to stop the train because they're being held up by the gyro captain and his kid because they blocked the train. Apparently, they knew the train was coming. Maybe they have a regular schedule or something. I don't know. So they follow this kid down some shaft and uh, that's camouflaged by some old beat up car. And Max recognizes the gyro captain, which is interesting. Um, but you know, it's he recognizes him as the guy who steals his car, not the guy who he was with years before. Oh no, that's not the same guy. Sorry. He of course knows he has a plane, right? So well, that's why he's still alive. That's why they let him live because you know he has a plane and he can save them all. So all the kids pile on the plane. There's no fear of flying, even though they've never flown before. But then again, that's not exactly true. They've lived with an idea of an airplane all their lives. It just didn't run, and this one does. So okay. This is actually a pretty cool part in the production of the movie because they fly into a sandstorm, and that's actually real. During shooting, um, the little plane actually encountered a unannounced sandstorm, and the footage was good, so they decided to uh, shoot more of it by having the cast stand in the back of a truck um, during the sandstorm, so they could show them on the plane. Anyway, so finally they all get in the plane, and Max jumps off at the last second, and the plane takes off, and Max is left behind, which is the typical ending to a Mad Max movie. So the others are saved, and they fly off, and last thing you see is Iron Bar covered in a flipped over truck, and you see his arm extend, and he gives the bird, which is not exactly PG, but it's funny. And Auntie shows up, and so she has nothing to gain by killing him apparently. And this is a Disney movie, so or well, sort of Disney movie by Warner Brothers, and so she doesn't kill him. She just laughs and says, "Well, ain't we a pair, Raggedy Man?" So that's it's still a cool ending though. So anyway, she says goodbye to him, and so Max is left behind, wandering through the wrecked cars. And meanwhile, the tribe that left, because there's now two tribes, the tribe that stayed and the tribe that left. That's how the story is told. They fly over Sydney, and you see the opera house, or at least what left of it, and you see empty husk of a city. But they decide to live there. They start a new tribe, and that's the end of the movie. It's no big surprise that it didn't do what they hoped it would do, which is make more money than the Road Warrior. But then again, they should have made a Road Warrior movie then, a Mad Max movie, and not uh, this neutered PG version we got. And so that was the end of Mad Max for decades until George Miller tried to revive it with a TV show in the 90s, which in my opinion would have worked. I mean, you had back then you had like TV shows like Highlander, and of course you had Hercules and Xena Warrior Princess, and it could have been something like that. That could have worked. Wouldn't have been as much fun as the first two movies, but well, there you have it. In 2008, they tried to revive Mad Max with Mel Gibson, but that was when Mel Gibson was persona non grata, so alas. And finally, in 2000. was it 15? Fury Road came out, and Tom Hardy took the part of Mad Max in a film that doesn't really connect to this one or the other two before. So there you have it, the loosely connected Mad Max saga. I have mixed feelings about this film. Production wise, it's the best one in the bunch because it's American, and they throw money at everything, so it looks fantastic. Storyline wise, it could have, as I said, it could have done better. It lacked that kind of uh, quirky Aussiness that the first two have that make it so good. It lacks the true nihilism that a post-apocalyptic world would be. I don't think Americans can cope with the notion that they have bombs that can create that kind of world that will not have a happy ending. They have to have a happy ending for everything, otherwise they can't sleep. Yeah, well, there you have it. Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. And there's a hell of a lot after the Thunderdome because you never see it again. It would have made more sense if they actually drug him back into the Thunderdome in some way, and that he'd have to, uh, I don't know, fight for the lives of the children in the Thunderdome. That would have made sense, but no, we get a train chase. So there you have it, Mad Max 3. I've watched it the least of all the Mad Max movies. I guess I am with most people. I want my Mad Max Rockatansky. I want him the way he's supposed to be, and not the way um, he was reimagined for this version. And so we say goodbye to Mad Max, at least the Mad Max of Mel Gibson. The last hurrah, how sad it is. And I bid you goodbye for today, but we have a whole new season coming. We have some excellent movies that are going to be covered. Bye for now.